Starting a new job is always a mix of excitement and nerves. When I landed a summer job at a local carnival in downtown LA, I was just looking for some extra cash before my senior year of college started in the fall. The carnival was a typical setup with rides, games, and food stands, but its main attraction was the fun house, which doubled as a haunted house after dark. It was actually a solid structure that I think used to be some old guy's mansion or something. I was assigned to manage the fun house, which was a favorite among the carnival goers. It seemed simple enough: guide the guests in, ensure they have a fun, safe time, and observe them leave. At first, everything seemed straightforward, but then I started noticing odd things. It started with small discrepancies. I'd count a dozen people entering, but only 11 would emerge. At first, I chalked it up to miscounting. After all, keeping track in the chaos of laughter and screams was no easy task. However, as the days passed, the numbers just didn't add up. 7 went in, 6 came out, 10 went in, 9 came out. Was I going crazy? Something was off, and I couldn't ignore it much longer. One particularly busy afternoon, a blonde girl caught my eye as she walked up to the fun house. She was drop-dead gorgeous and almost seemed out of place amidst the childlike atmosphere. She couldn't have been more than a few years older than me. I genuinely had to do a double take. I'm not a weird guy by any means, but I couldn't help but lock eyes with her for a few seconds. She smiled, handed me her ticket, and I directed her into the attraction. After she disappeared into the darkness, I went back to my duties. Time ticked by, and I watched attentively as people entered and exited, sometimes asking me questions and whatnot. Admittedly, I was paying a little more attention to the guests that night, as I wanted to see that girl as she left and maybe work up the courage to talk to her. Pretty soon, I started picking up on the fact that groups of people who had entered after her were beginning to emerge. A few more minutes passed, and I started getting worried. She should have been out by now. Compelled by genuine concern, I decided to abandon my post for a few minutes and go looking for her. I stepped inside and locked the entrance door. I began investigating, navigating the dimly lit rooms and narrow corridors. I moved through the house until I came across something I had noticed during my initial walkthrough: a barely noticeable seam in the wall. I'm not really sure what I was expecting, but curiosity got the best of me. I pressed against the seam, and I heard a distinct click. I played around with it some more, and my jaw nearly hit the floor when I realized it was a hidden door. It swung open slowly, revealing a pitch-black hallway. I stood there in shock. What in the world was this doing here? I was definitely going to have a long conversation with my boss about this. I walked into the hallway with my phone's flashlight guiding the way. I didn't have much brain power to spend being nervous because I was still so shocked about the whole situation. I got to the end of the passage and found another door. I flung it open, and to my surprise, it was a concealed exit that led back to the carnival grounds. I breathed a sigh of relief as this discovery proved I wasn't going crazy. All those people I had noticed leaving the attraction had probably stumbled across that secret door by accident and assumed it was the correct way to go. As I walked back the way I had come, I couldn't help but feel a little bummed out that I wasn't going to get the chance to talk to that girl. I'm not sure what came over me, but I decided to keep exploring the fun house instead of returning to my post. I think a part of me just wanted a few extra minutes of this impromptu break I was taking. I walked through a couple more rooms, and that's when I noticed it. On one of the walls was another faint seam identical to the first one I had seen. I again played with it until it clicked and swung open. I could immediately tell this one was very different. The putrid smell was the first thing I noticed. More concerning, though, was the fact that there was no corridor in this one, but a ladder. A ladder that led downwards. I was more confused than anything. This door was on the ground floor, and I was told specifically that this place didn't have a basement. I debated climbing down, but I just felt awful about the prospect that the girl might be down there. So, against my instincts, I began the descent. The smell only got worse as I climbed down into the darkness. I was expecting to find a basement, but what I found instead was far, far worse. I got to the bottom and pulled out my phone's flashlight. I was frozen in shock. I was literally standing in a tunnel that extended into the darkness. There was literally no way that this was part of the house above. The rational part of my brain screamed to turn back, to forget about it, but the mystery was too compelling. I ventured further, being careful not to make any noise. The walls were damp, and the tunnel was completely silent. As I explored, my flashlight beam fell on something unexpected. A white glittery purse was sitting in the middle of the corridor. I picked it up, turning it over in my hands. It looked familiar, and then it hit me. It was that girl's purse. I was sure of it. I started to panic. Was she really down here? I doubted there was any way a rational person could find this tunnel and not turn around, but the proof was literally in my hands. My mind started racing. Was she hurt? Lost? And then a more terrifying thought hit me: was she alone? I didn't feel safe anymore, but I was in too deep. Violating every survival instinct I had, I yelled out into the tunnel for that girl. I waited. Nothing. I was just about to shout again when I heard the sound of rapid footsteps echoing through the tunnels. My first instinct was to run. I had every reason to believe whoever was running toward me was hostile. I turned around and bolted back to the ladder. I got halfway up and slipped, falling back to the bottom. The footsteps were basically right on top of me now. I knew I was done for. I braced myself for a fight, and then a voice rang out, a girl's voice. Her voice. She gasped, clutching her side as if in pain. I yelled at her to climb up, but she insisted that I follow her back into the darkness. For some reason, I told her there was no chance I was doing that and basically forced her up the ladder. We got to the top, and I slammed the door shut. I asked her how in the world she ended up down there, and she couldn't really give me a straight answer. She kept saying she didn't really remember how it happened, just that she suddenly realized she was underground. She said she started hearing things moving in the dark and that there were voices calling to her. I didn't know how to process this. I asked her if someone had guided her down there, and she said she didn't remember. The weirdest thing about her story was that she was looking at me with this blank stare that genuinely freaked me out. I basically interrogated her about why she told me to stay down there, but she didn't answer. I had had enough. I wanted to get as far away from this person as possible. I called the police, but she opted to leave the fun house before they got there. I never saw her again. The police investigated, and what they found was actually insane. Apparently, this house had been some sort of safe house during Prohibition in the 1920s. As such, it had a bunch of secret passageways that led to a section of the underground Prohibition tunnels that hadn't been discovered. The owner claimed he had no idea about the house's history, but I was skeptical. I quit my job and got as far away from there as possible. I still have so many questions. Did the owner know about this? Was that girl almost kidnapped? Had someone knocked her out and taken her down there or something? Was she part of the whole thing? I feel like there are a number of explanations for what happened to me, but all of them are equally terrifying. Every year our small town has a fairly popular carnival and rodeo. It's pretty much the only thing anyone around here looks forward to, or loathes, considering how many drunk tourists seem to find their way here and make fools of themselves dressing like cowboys. One night during the carnival 2 years ago, my mom decided to take my brother, myself, and 2 of my friends for the night to have some fun. We ended up parking on a residential street a few blocks away from the fairgrounds because there's no parking pretty much anywhere else. After a half-ass attempt at remembering the name of the street and the general area where we left our car, we all went on our way. Well, later that night, we couldn't remember for the life of us exactly where the car was. We searched street after street for 30 minutes with no luck. Finally, my mom, after seeing how tired we all were, told us to sit on the curb and wait while she went and looked. We were all well aware of stranger danger and were in a nice neighborhood, plus the community rarely has problems with violence of any sort, so we 3 15-year-old girls and 1 12-year-old boy thought there was nothing to worry about. 5 minutes after my mom disappeared, we hear the grass crunching on the lawn behind us, and all of us whip around to see who was now standing there. An older, lanky man with a hunchback and the coldest expression I'd ever seen was staring at us. Because his back was hunched, he stood there kind of crookedly. He didn't move or blink as he glared at us. "Why are you sitting on my curb?" he snapped, still not moving. It was unnerving how still he was. We immediately felt guilty, thinking this was just some scared or confused old man wondering why some teenagers were sitting outside of his house. I explained the situation to him, that my mom had gone to find our car and we would move across the street if we were bothering him. He stayed silent for a few seconds, then stared me down and said, "Come inside." The next few minutes are a blur as my adrenaline kicked in, and I was getting more and more scared of this man by the second. We didn't have the sense to just run. For some reason, he kept repeating, "Come inside." "What are you waiting for? Come inside my house. Get over here now. Get in my house." No matter what we said, he didn't seem to hear, and he thankfully didn't move from his spot on the lawn, like he just expected us to come with him. He was especially focused on my friend and me, just telling us over and over again to go with him inside his house. No matter how much we tried to get in his head that my mom was coming back soon, the look in his eyes just kept getting colder and more furious the longer he stood there. It didn't occur to me that his hand had been hidden behind his back the entire time until my mom showed up. We were all relieved, saying, "See, we told you, there she is." And like now, my mom is a scary woman. She does not take shit and she'll happily start throwing punches if she feels the situation calls for it. So immediately she was in Mama Bear mode and furiously telling off this old man after she saw how freaked out we all were. He was just now starting to move back to his house. He slunk away from her and glared at the 4 of us, batting his free hand at her, cursing and mumbling to himself. We watched him go, and as he turned around, my blood went cold. In the hand that he had been hiding was a large knife. It glinted off the street lamp, and we all hurried away to our car that my mom had found. My friends and I tried to laugh it off, but we were all scared and not willing to be alone for the rest of the night. It's seriously scary to think about what was running through that old man's head, especially since he was holding that damn knife the whole time. So, creepy old man with a knife behind his back, let's not meet. I hate carnivals. I think they're disgusting and filled with children. I hate the food, the games, and the smell of it all. My hatred of carnivals is probably biased, though, and mostly based on what I'm about to tell you. A few years ago, I was dragged to our local carnival by my younger sister. I obviously wasn't going to be rude and not go, but I wasn't looking forward to it. After a while, my sister got bored and wanted to leave, so I called my mom to pick us up. I actually opted not to go with them as I was in the midst of a fight with my dad and didn't want to go back home until he was asleep. I told my mom I'd walk home later, so she picked up my sister and left. The carnival was honestly a little pathetic. There were far fewer people there that night than I remember there being in previous years, and everyone looked miserable. I figured I might as well walk around a little to try and get my money's worth. After all, I had paid for a ticket out of my own pocket. I decided to step into the fun house as I figured that would at least be a little cool. I was expecting there to be a ton of people in there, but it was completely empty. There was literally not a single other person in there as far as I could tell. I had never been inside a fun house alone before. People don't realize how important the laughter and talking is to the atmosphere. Without it, you're basically just standing there in silence, surrounded by a bunch of weird mirrors. It was honestly a little creepy. I shrugged my shoulders and figured I might as well walk through it. Admittedly, I did get a pretty good laugh out of the distorted mirrors. I think I was like halfway through when I noticed something odd in one of the reflections. To my left, there was a head that seemed to be peering at me. I only saw it for a split second, but it was a bald guy with really sunken eyes. I whipped around but didn't see anyone. To be completely honest, I had no idea where he had even been standing. Since there were mirrors all over the place, he could have literally been anywhere. I thought it was especially creepy since I didn't hear the funhouse entrance open. He either snuck in behind me or he had already been inside. I kept walking, going a little more quickly now, and then I saw him again out of the corner of my eye. He had this deranged smile. This time it was the exact same face, I was positive. I tried to figure out where he was standing, but the reflections were too confusing. I yelled for him to get lost but got no response. I wasn't sure what I was expecting. I picked up the pace again, but it was difficult trying to navigate this maze of mirrors, and I kept hitting dead ends. I started sweating, constantly looking over my shoulder every few seconds. A few minutes later, I turned a corner after hitting another dead end, and a hand reached out from behind one of the mirrors, grabbing my wrist. I screamed, cursing at the guy to let go of me, but he held firm. I punched his arm, forcing him to let go. I fell to the ground in the fray and saw the creepster in his full form. He was wearing all gray, had a bit of a gut, and a tired, sunken face. I jumped to my feet before he could reach for me again and sprinted back the way I came. I don't know if it was survival instincts or not, but finding my way back to the entrance was somehow easier with the adrenaline coursing through my veins. I sprinted out of the fun house and caught my breath. I reached into my back pocket and a horrifying realization hit me: I didn't have my wallet. I must have dropped it when I fell. There was no way I was going back in there. After running to the nearest staff person, I told them everything that happened. She seemed confused and told me that the fun house was closed to patrons that night. I was horrified. They called the police and searched it but found nothing, not even my wallet. I felt like such an idiot. I told them that that guy was probably an ex-employee with a key, but they shrugged off my theory and told me to go home. So reluctantly, that's what I did. It's not like I had gotten hurt or anything. I wish I could tell you the story ended there, but I can't. A week later, my girlfriend called me one night in a panic, frantically screaming into the phone about something terrible that happened. Apparently, someone had been texting her phone pretending to be me and convinced her to drive out to this remote location to help me change a tire. Thankfully, she decided to bring her dad even though the guy told her to come alone. They pretty quickly realized what was going on when the car parked in the lot wasn't mine. Her dad stepped out of the car, and 6 dudes stepped out of the car in front of them. He sprinted back to the car and hightailed it out of there before those guys could catch up to him. The whole thing made sense. I did have my girlfriend's number written down on a slip of paper in my wallet, which explains how he got her number. Both of us changed all our contact information, and it's been a month without incident. I really don't know how to feel about this whole ordeal. I think I'm just going to try to block the memory out of my head. Creepy carnival workers. So this happened when I was younger, quite a while ago, but it's one of the creepiest things that has ever happened to me, and I thought y'all might like to hear it. Anyways, I was probably about 10 or 11 years old, and my mom dropped me and my younger brother off at this little carnival thing in the supermarket parking lot. I don't know if they really do stuff like that anymore, but they used to set up smaller carnivals with maybe like 10 rides and a couple of food vendors. Anyways, we had been there for maybe an hour, and I noticed that this guy had been watching us for a while. Then I realized that he was sort of following us around to the different rides. I figured he was one of the workers since he was wearing a carnival hat and his clothes were pretty much the same colors as the other people working there. I would look around and spot him watching us from a couple of rides over or standing next to one of the food stands. Now, I don't want to be rude, but this guy had the creepiest freaking face. One of his eyes looked like it had been swallowed up by this huge swollen eyelid. He had these chapped lips that looked like they were bleeding in places, and he just kept following us around for like 30 minutes, mumbling to himself and staring. After a while, I decided that we should leave and find a way to call my mom. As we were about to leave the carnival area, literally about to walk through the exit, this guy hollers to both of us and grabs my brother's shoulder to pull him back in. He started telling us that we're too young to be there alone and asking where our parents are. I mean, I was young, but there were tons of kids there even younger than us without their parents. He pulled us off to the side area between two rides and pushed us behind him, then just stood guard in front of us like that. I kept asking to use a phone to call my mother since I was still hoping it was actually about us being too young to be there by ourselves. Finally, he gives me this phone that obviously has no SIM card in it or something because it just displays that error message that old phones used to have. I kept begging him to let us go, and he kept muttering, "No, we're going to take you somewhere real safe, real safe." Then he starts laughing and asked if my mom had picked up, which obviously not, and saying he's going to have to take us himself since there's no one else to take us, whatever that he had planned. Finally, we see another worker walking by and I yell to her if I can use her phone. The guy immediately freezes and then just starts walking away like nothing happened. I explained to the woman what had happened and she just looked really confused and kind of worried. I didn't find out until a couple years later, but I guess she told my mom that she didn't think the guy even worked there, that she had never seen him before in her time working. So that happened. Thanks for watching the video. Subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications to watch the latest videos.